I told you, didn't I? You should have quit your job and devoted yourself to Jeff. I'm sure Jeff is crying in heaven right now, wondering why on earth he married someone like you. Jeff and I had a happy married life, but I couldn't stand being around his mother, Marcia, or his sister, Cindy. They always found a way to make unpleasant remarks about me. Jeff eventually got fed up and cut ties with his family. After that, we were able to regain our peaceful life together, but then Jeff was diagnosed with lung cancer. I worked hard and supported Jeff, but after 2 surgeries where in the end he lost his left lung, his health took a severe turn. At that point, Jeff said he didn't have much time left and wanted to move back to his family home. I agreed to his request and we moved in with Marcia and Cindy, but after Jeff passed away, Marcia gave all of his inheritance to Cindy. I realized I didn't need to endure any longer, so I left their house, saying, "I'll see you in court." My name is Carolyn. I'm 48 years old and I married my husband Jeff 25 years ago. Meeting Jeff, who was 3 years older than me, felt like something out of a romance novel. I dropped my wallet one day and it was Jeff who noticed and picked it up for me. That's how our story began. At the time, I was rushing to work. I was working as an office clerk at a small company and I hadn't finished organizing some important documents, so I was in a rush. So I quickly bowed my head and thanked him, then rushed off to work. Regardless that we were in the middle of a crowded street, he had called out loudly, "You dropped your wallet." He has such a kind face. His gentle demeanor matched perfectly with the act of returning my wallet. At the time, I never imagined we'd cross paths again. I thought it would be the last time I ever saw him and went back to my chaotic daily routine. One weekend, I found myself bored out of my mind, so I decided to head downtown for a change of pace. I felt like wasting my day off cooped up at home would have been such a shame. I put on a little makeup, dressed up, and stepped outside. The weather was gorgeous, and just walking around felt uplifting. As I wandered the bustling streets alone, "Hey, wait, it's you, isn't it?" A voice called out, and when I looked up, there he was, Jeff, standing right in front of me. "Oh, thank you for helping me back then. I never expected to see you again." "You're not the only one. It's kind of surreal." Apparently, Jeff had just finished watching a movie and was pondering what to do next when I suddenly appeared in his path. He said it was an impulse to call out to me, and now he seemed unsure of what to say next, shifting nervously on his feet. "I don't have any plans today. How about we grab a coffee and chat?" I decided to take a bold step and ask. Looking back, it might have seemed forward, but honestly, I was just bored and craving a little company. I also felt like I owed him a small treat for the kindness he's shown me. Jeff looked a little surprised by my sudden invitation, but he agreed quickly, and we found a cozy coffee shop nearby. He worked as a sales representative at a fairly well-known company, which probably explained his knack for storytelling. He went on and on about how dull the movie he'd just seen was, but in such a captivating way that I couldn't help but laugh. I was both impressed by his eloquence and amused by his wit. Clearly, he was good at his job. Before parting ways, we exchanged numbers, and that simple gesture turned into a blossoming relationship that eventually led to marriage. I was over the moon with happiness, but meeting his family for the first time filled me with unease. His father had passed away a few years earlier, so it was just his mother, Marcia, and his sister, Cindy, whom I met. Right from the start, I felt an air of disapproval directed at me. I couldn't help but think that I had done something to offend them, so I asked Jeff on the way home, unable to contain my anxiety. "Did I say or do something wrong?" "No, you didn't do anything wrong. My mom's been a bit overbearing ever since my dad passed away. She's like that with everyone. You don't need to take it personally." If you say so. Give it some time. Things will smooth over eventually. Jeff's reassurance helped me shake off my doubts and move on. Shortly after, we got married and started our life together. Life with Jeff was joyful and full of love, but the thought of visiting his family filled me with dread. Even though we only visited twice a year, once at Christmas and once in the summer, it was enough to make me feel physically ill before each trip. The reason was obvious. Marcia's blatant hostility was emotionally draining. Why aren't you a stay-at-home wife? It's a wife's duty to support her husband. Maybe that's why you haven't been able to have kids yet. Why don't you think about your role a little more? Her values were hopelessly outdated, and being pressured to conform to them was exhausting. I knew that standing up to her would only make things worse, so I stayed quiet. "Yes, you're absolutely right," I'd say, pretending to agree. Jeff would tell me to ignore her, but every visit left me feeling drained. 3 years into our marriage, his sister Cindy got divorced and moved back in with Marcia. That only made visiting their house even more unbearable. Marcia and Cindy teamed up to hurl unfounded insults at me. "So when are you having kids? I'm dying to see my grandkids. Maybe there's something wrong with your body. It's probably your fault." It's not like infertility runs in our family, so it couldn't possibly be Jeff's issue. What kind of warped prejudice made them think they could say such ridiculous things? For the first time, I felt anger bubbling up from deep within, ready to fight back. But Jeff spoke up before I could. That's enough. How can you say something so ridiculous with a straight face? How much more do you need to put Carolyn down to feel satisfied? Family or not, this is way out of line. Carolyn, we don't need to stay here anymore. Let's go home. Marcia and Cindy erupted, shouting, "How dare you say that?" But Jeff ignored them completely, took my hand, and walked me out of the house. He started the car and drove off. When I glanced back from the passenger seat, I saw Marcia and Cindy standing outside, glaring at us as we drove away. We drove in silence for a while until Jeff finally broke this tension. "I'm sorry for making you put up with all of that. I never thought my family could turn into such a nightmare. When Dad passed, I thought time would heal their pain and they'd go back to being that kind people I used to know. Cindy's been so bitter ever since her divorce too. We don't have to visit my mom's place anymore. It's not worth it." "Are you sure about this?" "I mean, it would be a relief for me, but yeah, I'm sure. If fate brings us together again, so be it. They're still family after all." And just like that, we stopped visiting Jeff's family and a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. The 7 years that followed were undeniably the happiest of our lives. We weren't blessed with children, but that didn't diminish the wonderful life we shared. We traveled during our vacations, spent weekends watching movies, and went shopping nearby. Even the simplest moments were pure joy. But in the 12th year of our marriage, an overwhelming despair struck us like a plunge into darkness. Jeff's routine company health screening revealed some irregularities, and he was advised to get further testing. A few of my coworkers had to go through the same thing. "It's probably nothing. You really don't need to worry." Hearing additional testing alarmed me, but Jeff's optimistic attitude made me believe it would be okay. But the results of the follow-up tests revealed that Jeff had lung cancer. He would need to have 1/3 of his left lung removed. The word cancer sent me spiraling into a state of panic. Jeff, however, remained calm and managed to ground me. I get that hearing the word cancer is scary, but they said it's treatable if we remove the affected part of my lung. "If you stress yourself out too much, you'll make yourself sick, Carolyn." Not wanting to add to Jeff's burden, I feigned composure, but inside I was anything but calm. After all, cancer has been one of the leading causes of death in the US for decades. Who wouldn't worry in my position? But if I panicked, it would only make things harder for Jeff. He was the one battling lung cancer. He had been feeling even more afraid and confused than I was. I reminded myself to stay strong and prayed with all my heart that Jeff's surgery would go smoothly. Whether it was my prayers or sheer luck, the surgery went off without a hitch. When Jeff woke up, relief washed over me and I cried tears of joy. But that was just the beginning of what would become the real test for Jeff and me. With 1/3 of his lung removed, Jeff could no longer live life the way he used to. Breathing became difficult. Even minimal exertion left him gasping for air, making it impossible for him to continue working full-time. Still, Jeff pushed himself to return to work, but his boss eventually told him it wasn't feasible, forcing him into early retirement. In his mid-30s, Jeff had been in his prime working years. Losing his strength and career left him feeling increasingly frustrated. He began speaking harshly about himself, blaming his illness for robbing him of a productive life. I'd always known Jeff as a positive person, and it broke my heart to see him this way. Still, I couldn't blame him. Losing his job and his health so abruptly would leave anyone feeling hopeless. I stayed by Jeff's side during those sleepless nights when he felt worthless, teaching him how he could help with household chores while I worked. Before his diagnosis, we were both working, but I usually came home earlier and handled most of the chores. At first, I told Jeff he didn't need to do anything, but it became clear that having nothing to do was harder on him. But even small tasks left him short of breath. Still, he worked hard to do what he could around the house. "Don't overdo it, okay?" Even as I said that, I'd pitch in to help. Over time, Jeff slowly adjusted to his body's limitations, and his smile began to return. Seeing that gave me the strength to work even harder. After all, my income was now supporting both of us. I poured myself into my career, and my efforts paid off. I was promoted, and my salary increased. I got a promotion, and a raise too. When I told Jeff, he celebrated as if it were his own success. "Thank you so much, Carolyn. If it weren't for you, I would have spiraled deeper into despair and given up completely. You keep pushing forward, and it makes me want to do the same." I feel the same way. You helping out around the house means the world to me. Considering how much your body has been through, it's amazing how much you've managed to do. Together, Jeff and I overcame the challenges of his lung cancer. I thought we could finally move forward and enjoy life together again, but 6 years after his first surgery, Jeff's cancer returned. We knew the risk of recurrence, but we had let ourselves believe it was all behind us. The shock hit us even harder because of that. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, but Jeff lost his entire left lung. This left him even weaker, and doing even the simplest chores became too much for him. As his health worsened, Jeff lost the spark that once defined him. He spent most of his days in bed, barely moving. I tried everything I could to cheer him up, speaking to him with encouragement and love, but my words didn't seem to reach him. The house was filled with a heavy gloom, and the absence of Jeff's usual brightness was the hardest thing to bear. One evening, when I came home from work, Jeff greeted me with a serious expression. "Carolyn, I know it's asking a lot, but I've been thinking. I want to move back to my mom's house. Probably don't have much time left. I can't bear the thought of leaving this world without making peace with my mom and Cindy. I know it'll make your commute longer, and I hate to inconvenience you." Jeff bowed his head deeply, his voice heavy with regret. It had been 18 years since we distanced ourselves from his family. I hadn't seen Marcia or Cindy in all that time, but Jeff had apparently met them a few times a year. He never told me directly, but I'd caught him on the phone with his mom a few times, and he had mentioned visiting her. He must have taken some days off before or after the holidays, intentionally avoiding the days that I was also off from work. I didn't mind that. The real question was whether I could agree to move back in with his family for his sake. Just the thought of returning to that house filled me with a deep, dark resentment. Living there again would almost certainly reignite all the pain and negativity. But in all our years together, Jeff had never made such a personal request of me. And who could blame him for wanting to spend his remaining days with his family? After much thought and inner turmoil, I decided to honor Jeff's wish and move back into his family home. As I had expected, Marcia and Cindy greeted me with open hostility, glaring at me whenever they saw me. "Mom, Cindy, please, for my sake, try to get along with Carolyn. You know how serious my condition is, right? I don't know how much time I have left. I just want us to live peacefully together." Marcia and Cindy exchanged glances before forcing saccharine smiles. "Of course, we'll get along." Her tone dripped with insincerity as she chuckled. "I'll honor my son's request." "I think you're misunderstanding something, Carolyn. I have no ill feelings toward you." "Yeah, Mom's right. It's like you've been the one avoiding us all these years. But now's a great chance for us to reconnect." I couldn't believe for a second that those words reflected their true feelings. Their tone was laced with subtle jabs and condescension, filling me with a familiar sense of unease. But Jeff, ever the optimist, took their words at face value. "Please, let's all try to get along. I just want to spend my final days living happily together." He responded with a hopeful smile. At first, their hostility was limited to veiled comments, but within a month, they started openly expressing their displeasure toward me. "It's outrageous that you're still working when Jeff's in this condition. Don't you want to spend as much time as possible with him? I can't believe how cold-hearted you are. Poor Jeff, he deserves better. He probably got cancer because of the stress from marrying you. My poor brother, he's so unlucky. He ended up with such a worthless wife. Your behavior toward us says it all. We never even did anything to you, but you stopped coming here anyway. Guess you can't hide how awful you are." By then, I couldn't hold back anymore. I found myself snapping back. "Excuse me, but if I quit my job, how exactly do you expect me to support Jeff? Unless you, Marcia, or Cindy plan to foot the bill, I don't have that luxury. Of course, I want to spend as much time with Jeff as possible. But let's be honest, you're not about to help, are you?" My blunt response and undeniable logic made Marcia's face turn beet red with rage. "Shut your mouth. You're just a smooth-talking nobody who doesn't even know how to show respect to her elders. I'm sure everyone at your workplace is talking behind your back. It's a wonder you haven't been fired yet." Marcia stomped her foot, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared at me. Cindy, ever eager to back her mother, let out a condescending laugh and joined the fray. "You've got some nerve talking back when you're the one being housed here. You're just unbelievably shameless, Carolyn. It's almost impressive how completely oblivious you are to your own audacity. Why don't you understand your place? You're such a delusional woman." Cindy continued her verbal assault, but I realized arguing with them was pointless. I abruptly cut her off and stood up. "I'm going grocery shopping." With that, I walked out of the room. From that day on, every time Marcia or Cindy saw me, they would unleash a barrage of unreasonable comments. They made sure to do it out of Jeff's earshot, which made it even more infuriating. In Jeff's presence, they acted sweet and kind, but the moment he left, their behavior turned vicious. The drastic shift in their demeanor was mentally exhausting. I considered confiding in Jeff about how his mom and sister were treating me. But Jeff was already struggling so much. The last thing I wanted was to burden him further, so I chose to keep it to myself. To escape the toxic atmosphere at home, I poured myself into my work. Besides, we needed the money, and working more meant spending less time with Marcia and Cindy. Unfortunately, it also meant I spent less time with Jeff. And of course, Marcia and Cindy found a way to criticize me for it. Do you even love Jeff? You're always working and hardly ever home. It's disgraceful. I can't believe this. You might not have much time left with him, you know. Your actions say it all. I feel so bad for my brother. Honestly, maybe you two should just get divorced. I wanted to scream at them. Whose fault do you think it is that I can't spend more time with Jeff? The urge to yell at them was overwhelming. I wanted to tell them outright that their cruel words were the very reason I stayed away. But I held my tongue. If I gave in to their taunts, it would only validate their behavior. Instead, I ignored them, went inside and spoke to Jeff. You're looking better today. How are you feeling? Not too bad. You, on the other hand, look absolutely exhausted. Did Mom or Cindy say something to you? Is everything okay? They're always smiling when I'm around, but I worry about what they might be saying when I'm not. Jeff, who had distanced themselves from his family long ago, must have sensed that I was bearing the brunt of their hostility. I'm fine, really. You should focus on your own health. Seeing you doing well is the best thing for me. I know this is all because of my selfish request, and I'm sorry for putting you through it. I feel so guilty about it. It's obvious Mom and Cindy don't understand everything you've done for me. I feel like I'm just a burden to you. If it ever gets to be too much, I wouldn't blame you for leaving this house. I know how much you've already done for me. His words nearly brought me to tears, but I managed to hold them back. As long as I can help you, that's all I need. I could never leave you behind. I'll be okay. Thank you. Just having you here gives me the strength to keep going. That's what I truly believed, but the relentless barrage of cruel words from Marcia and Cindy began to wear me down. As I climbed the ranks at work and took on more responsibilities, I found myself seeing Jeff even less. I started to question why I was working so hard. The more I worked to provide for Jeff, the less time we actually spent together. On top of that, Marcia and Cindy's attacks never ceased, wearing me down year after year. Then, as if to deal the final blow, Jeff suffered a sudden respiratory failure in the 12th year after his cancer diagnosis. He was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, but he didn't make it. I received the call at work and rushed to the hospital, but by the time I arrived, Jeff had already passed. I was absolutely devastated. Marcia and Cindy wasted no time unleashing a torrent of abuse at me. I told you, didn't I? You should have quit your job and devoted yourself to Jeff. I'm sure Jeff is crying in heaven right now, wondering why he ever married someone like you. As his mother, I'm furious with you. Look at my brother, lying there, lifeless. How does that make you feel? I'm embarrassed to even be related to someone like you. No matter how much you regret it, Jeff's never coming back. You couldn't even be by his side at the end. What kind of wife does that make you? But their words didn't register. All I could do was stare blankly at Jeff, lying motionless in the hospital bed. Memories of our 25 years of marriage swirled through my mind. For 12 long years after his cancer diagnosis, I have fought tooth and nail to support him through everything. It wasn't the kind of time you could process and let go of so easily. I was still in a state of emotional numbness when we held Jeff's funeral. He was cremated and laid to rest. The whole process felt surreal, as if I were sleepwalking through it. The overwhelming sense of loss left me paralyzed. I went to work on autopilot, finished my tasks, and collapsed into bed as soon as I got home. There was no reason for me to stay at Jeff's family home, but the thought of finding a new place felt overwhelming. So I just stayed, dragging out my days in a haze. But of course, Marcia and Cindy weren't about to leave me alone. One evening, I came home from work to find Marcia and Cindy waiting for me, smirking condescendingly. You look like you've aged a decade in the past few weeks. By the way, how much longer are you planning to stay here? Now that Jeff's gone, you're basically a stranger to us. Why don't you go ahead and move out already? What nerve you have still staying here? You're just flaunting how devastated you are, aren't you? Not that you actually care. It's disgusting. Just leave already. By this point, their words no longer had any power over me. Still, I knew they were right about one thing. I didn't need to stay here. I was about to tell them I'd leave as soon as I found a new place when Marcia smirked and said something that stopped me cold. Oh, by the way, I should let you know. Jeff's inheritance? I've given all of it to Cindy. She's his only blood relative, so it's only natural. It's none of your business, Carolyn, but I'm sure Jeff is smiling down from heaven, knowing his money went to the right place. Exactly. You were his wife in name only. You never really did anything for him. There's no way my brother would have wanted to leave anything to an outsider like you. Not someone who abandoned him to focus on her career. Now pack your things and get out. They burst into cruel laughter, their voices echoing through the house like a pair of cackling witches. Their eyes gleamed with mockery as if my pain was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Strangely, I didn't feel anger. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet pity for how small and hateful they'd become. These women were rotten to their core, and no words I could muster would ever reach them. They were the kind of people who would only understand when they finally faced real consequences. I had realized this long ago, but even I hadn't grasped the full extent of their ignorance. I looked at Marcia and Cindy with a calm, unreadable expression and said the one thing they didn't expect. "I see. Then I guess I'll see you in court." When they heard the word court, their faces twisted in confusion before they started laughing again, louder this time. "Oh my gosh, she's lost her mind. This is absolutely ridiculous. You think you can sue us? Did you hit your head or something? Maybe she's having a nervous breakdown. You should check yourself into a hospital. No one in their right mind would think like this." I let out a deep sigh. How could anyone sink to this level of pettiness? Thinking how ignorance truly breeds foolishness, I packed my things, listening to their sneers as I walked out the door. I checked into a small hotel that night, searched online for apartments, and moved into a new place within days. And then I sued Marcia. She claimed Jeff's inheritance had gone to Cindy, but the account she emptied was actually in my name, containing money I had inherited from my grandfather. I had left that account untouched, a safety net for emergencies. In other words, she had no legal right to give Cindy money that belonged to me. The evidence was airtight, and I had every reason to believe I would win this case. In addition, I filed a separate lawsuit against Marcia and Cindy for the emotional distress they had caused me over the years. For the past 3 years, I had been carrying a voice recorder every time I visited their house, capturing every insult and cruel remark. In other words, I had an extensive collection of recordings that documented their abuse. With such solid evidence, losing either case was out of the question. During the trial, Marcia called me, screaming furiously over the phone. "What the hell are you thinking, suing me out of nowhere? We let you live in our home, and this is how you repay us? Do you have no shame at all?" I couldn't believe the nonsense she was spouting, but I calmly responded in an icy tone. "If anyone should feel ashamed, it's you, Marcia. All I'm asking is for you to take responsibility for your actions. That's why I've turned to the legal system. There's no way I'm dropping the case. I'm busy, so I'll be ending this call now." Marcia continued shouting incoherent threats, but her words didn't faze me in the slightest. After hanging up, I blocked her number, and I blocked Cindy's number as well. It was only a matter of time before Cindy would try calling me after hearing about it from her mom. I figured this would be the last I'd ever have to deal with them. But then something completely unexpected happened. Marcia and Cindy showed up at my apartment. "We had your address looked up, and here we are. Come out right now. If you don't open the door, we'll keep making noise until you do. Don't care if we wake up the whole neighborhood." The two of them were shouting at the top of their lungs, causing a scene in front of my door. But I had no intention of giving them what they wanted. After listening to their insults for over 10 minutes, I calmly pulled out my phone and called the police. Even when they heard me on the phone with the police, they didn't stop. They only grew louder. When the officers arrived, Marcia and Cindy still refused to stop. Naturally, they were restrained and escorted into the back of a police car. Watching them, I felt a strange sense of pity for how utterly hopeless they were. And so, here's what happened to them after that. Here's how things unfolded for Marcia and Cindy after that fateful day. After being taken to the police station, they were given a stern warning and sent home. I half expected them to try coming back, but it seemed they finally realized they'd crossed the line and stayed away from my apartment. The court case proceeded smoothly, and the money Marcia had given to Cindy was legally returned to me. However, Cindy had apparently squandered the money as soon as she got her hands on it, leaving her in debt to loan companies. On top of that, the court ruled in favor for emotional distress, ordering both Marcia and Cindy to pay me damages. Marcia had to borrow money to pay the settlement, and Cindy's debts continued to spiral out of control. Cindy, who had quit her job shortly after receiving the inheritance, had no steady income, and Marcia's fixed retirement benefits were barely enough to scrape by. With their backs against the wall, the two started arguing constantly, and their already fragile relationship completely fell apart. In a fit of rage, Cindy stormed out of the family home only to find herself with nowhere to go and eventually homeless. She was reportedly surviving on meals provided by local charities and shelters. It was a tragic turn of events, and one I promised myself I would never allow in my own life. Marcia, left alone in the house, poured her pension into paying off debts, but I had little left for basic necessities. She eventually had to rely on government assistance just to survive. No doubt she would face even harsher realities ahead, but all I could think was that it was simply the result of her own actions. I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that she would reflect on her choices and try to live better. But whatever happened to them from here was no longer my concern. As for me, my story didn't end there. Today, I am fully dedicated to my career. I've been recognized for my hard work and recently became the first woman in my company to be promoted to manager. My relationship with my colleagues are excellent and I truly enjoy my work. Of course, I still think about Jeff sometimes. I still regret the time we lost together after moving in with his family. But the time we did share remains my most cherished treasure. Thinking of him brings warmth to my heart, though it's tinged with bittersweet sorrow. Thank you, Jeff. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made, and I will keep moving forward, holding on to his memory while embracing my future. And so I resolved to continue moving forward, carrying Jeff's memory in my heart while building a life of my own. As I thought of Jeff, I slowly began piecing together a new routine, one day at a time. The memories of him were both my foundation and a source of hope for what was to come. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. One day, a younger colleague of mine unexpectedly asked me to join him for dinner. We'd always been on good terms at work, but nothing beyond casual conversations. I was caught off guard, but couldn't bring myself to decline, so I accepted his invitation. That dinner turned out to be far more comfortable than I had expected, and our conversation flowed effortlessly. He shared stories about the stress of his job and his dreams for the future, and I found myself opening up about my own experiences. There was an uncanny sense of ease in our dialogue, as if we'd known each other far longer than we had. Over the following weeks, we went on a few more dinners and casual walks, and before I knew it, a small spark had ignited in my heart. Though I still thought of Jeff every day, this new feeling began to wrap itself around me like a warm embrace. About 6 months later, he confessed his feelings to me with a nervous but determined look in his eyes. I've wanted to tell you this for a while. Carolyn, would you consider dating me with the thought of marriage in mind? The moment I heard those words, my heart began to race. Are you sure? I mean, I'm almost 50. Your age doesn't matter. I already know that you're an incredible person, Carolyn. Everyone at work respects you, and I've been drawn to that ever since I met you. His sincere words brought tears to my eyes. After losing Jeff, I never imagined I'd feel love like this again. Encouraged by his kindness and warmth, I decided to take a step forward. A few years later, we had a beautiful wedding and began building a life filled with joy and companionship. I will never forget Jeff, but I feel his memory urging me to embrace this new chapter. Jeff, because of you, I found happiness again. Life is full of hardships, but as long as there's hope, we can always find the strength to move forward. And I will continue to live, always looking toward the future.